For
to
sure.
throw back to you, Plan C, because a lot of people is talking about right now that we are getting into the next phase of the bull market or bull run, and I think a lot of people is right now, at least in this moment, thinking about whether to double down and then hit the next wave of the bull run, or to cash out because we've been going up a lot the past few days. So what do you see? Do you see a second run coming up, or yeah, where do you see the market going from here, basically?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely not financial advice. I would say for myself,
Mm,
like my focus is on long term. I'm not someone who, although there are things on chain and different indicators you can look at for short term. I don't tend to focus on that. So I'm not really super confident in like any kind of short term predictions or anything like that. But I do feel like this. My overall feeling is from looking at all the data is this bull run is far from over. This market cycle is far from over, and I could
mm,
go into a million reasons why. A
mm,
couple of very basic reasons is you can really see. So in any market cycle, what you have is you have older wallets. So there's something called hodl waves. And what
mm,
hodl waves are is they can actually, the cool thing about blockchain is you have all these insights with the on-chain data that you just don't get in a lot of other systems. So
true.
what you're able to see is they can cluster wallets, and they can see, okay, what percentage of wallets have held their Bitcoin for, or not wallets, actual Bitcoin. So they can determine
Mm,
how many Bitcoin were purchased and have been held over a year, how many have been held. Like there's different levels, right? You have a year, you have 2 years, you have 5 years, 7 years, you have 6 months, you have kind of like a range between like 3 to 6 months, and then between 1 to 3 months. So they kind of have these different points with these hodl waves. And what it's
mm,
the overall point of the whole that whole indicator, what it's determining is, okay, where's the short, like how is short-term money acting versus kind of like the long-term holders.
right.
And it gives you a sense of, okay, once these larger, because the thing about it is like it doesn't guarantee that somebody is a better investor or smarter just because they've been in the market longer. But
Mm,
what it does do is it gives you a longer time to educate yourself on the cycles. You're more experienced, so naturally, by having more experience of being in the market, you're more likely to sell at the right times just because you're more familiar with the cycles and how Bitcoin works in general. And then
right.
also by being in the market longer, you've had more chance, yeah, like I said, to educate yourself. And so for many reasons, the older wallets, their activity tends to indicate better. It correlates better with cycles, whereas the short term wallets and the short term money, when they sell and buy, like it's usually at the wrong times a lot of times. And we just saw this like confirmed
Mm,
completely on this last downturn. We had a lot of actually a lot of the wallets that were selling, and a lot of the money that was selling that on this last drop was actually wallets that were or Bitcoin that were 3 to 6 months old.
mm,
So it wasn't, we actually didn't see a lot of selling for the 1 year plus, very little selling for the 1 year plus. So that kind of shows me that they're still waiting for the next leg up in the
yeah.
cycle. It
Yeah.
kind of gives you an indication that a lot of the older holders, they're hodling,
Right.
they're not convinced this is the end of the cycle, and because of that, they help to set a floor on the price to, in a way, or the
Mm,
one aspect of what sets a floor, because they're just refusing to sell. They believe that there's more upside coming, and
mm,
so there, you can see that. You can really see that by looking at these wallets and how long they've held for. So that's
mm,
one way of looking at it. And so for me, if you look at the drawdown in the 1 year plus hodl wave, which is one of the most useful ways of looking at this, it's actually only dropped, relatively speaking, about 50% of what it usually drops during a full market cycle compared
mm,
to the previous three cycles. So, the previous two mainly the last two. So that's one indicator, right? You never want to look at one thing; you want to look at a lot to
right.
determine what to do. But that to me was a strong indication that the older wallets and the smarter money, you could say, more experienced. I call them more experienced market participants. Is essentially a way of
Mm,
looking at it.
mm,
They didn't sell, and so the other aspect to go into is usually at a cycle peak, you see a drop off in it's called, so there's new wallets that are being created, and there's also new entities on chain. Now an entity, the definition of an entity with Glassnode is, say someone has 10 wallets, and then they
mm,
move all those wallets to a single wallet at a certain point. Say they have a bunch of different wallets and they kind of condense them into one wallet. What that would be doing is that would be
mm,
taking 10 entities and condensing it into one entity.
mm,
Before on chain, before, when you look at the data, you don't know that those wallets are connected because they haven't done any activity in the past that would connect them. But once wallets get connected, once you have like, I'm not sure, like if you just think about your activity within crypto, I mean, there's probably been times where you've held money in various places, then at times you've kind of condensed those holdings into a certain place. Like, so on chain, they assess all this and they see like, okay, once people combined their coins, they can kind of narrow in. And because a lot of people wonder like how many people are actually in crypto, because a lot of people have multiple wallets. But it comes down to clustering. It comes down to identifying like wallet activity and how you can kind of narrow in on more what's called entities. So it's a closer way of looking at like how many people are actually in the market. So when you look at the net entity growth, if you look at people leaving the market, like when someone empties out all their wallets, or when someone empties out their singular wallet or whatever, then that's an entity being destroyed on chain. And so that's someone leaving the market essentially. But what we're seeing right now, what we've seen over the last month, is we've actually seen the net entity growth on chain hitting an all-time high. So what is basically on a larger scale showing you is that there's enough new money coming in and enough new interest and enough adoption at this point in the cycle to support the price. So if we had a decrease of interest or a decrease of these entities growing, a decrease of the essentially money flow into crypto. So yeah, like I said before, so the main overview way to say it is old money hasn't sold. They're for the most part, they're hodling through this downturn. You have still enough new entries coming in to support the price levels, because usually a market cycle peak, one of the main determining factors is you don't have enough new money coming in to support the price. So the price will drop because it's not necessarily about a lot of people selling. I mean, that's a factor, but it's also just not a lot of new money willing to buy that price level.
Right.
So what we're seeing is we have a lot of new money willing to buy this price level. And so that supports the price. So you have new money coming in, you have hitting an all-time high essentially in new entries on chain. You have old money not selling, old wallets not selling. And then on top of that, you have now you're starting to see outflows from the exchanges. You're actually starting to see the Bitcoin on the exchanges starting to, it just flipped actually recently to actually starting to decrease the amount of Bitcoin on chain. Or on the exchanges, I should say. So yeah, there's many other factors and many other ways of looking at it. But the last thing I'll mention on this topic is stable coins. So another reason why I was very confident that this wasn't the end of the market cycle was because we actually hit an all-time high for stable coins on exchange. So if this was the end of the cycle, you could see a lot of that money that's was sold from Bitcoin being taken into maybe dollars or just I don't know, like it just would, if it was like, so stable coins on exchange versus stable coins on Celsius, a little bit of a difference there, right? Because Celsius, these are people that are just happy to be in stable coins. They're not looking to get maybe back into a Bitcoin position. But on average, you could say that stable coins on exchanges indicates that money's on the sideline waiting to jump back in. So that's one way of looking at it. Is we saw a growth. We saw the drop of the Bitcoin price, but we saw an equal rise of the stable coins on exchanges, and we hit an all-time high with that. And so to me, that's like a lot of money was waiting on the sidelines, ready to get back into the market. So those are kind of some of the main things, right? Like that I just went through there. So a lot of new entries coming in, a lot of money on the sidelines, a lot of older wallets not selling. And then supply shock. We're continually having Bitcoin taken off these exchanges and put into older wallets that don't have a history of selling and accumulating. So I just look at this as a mid-cycle pause in the cycle. And as far as drivers, maybe I don't know, I should let you talk some more. I'm just rambling again. Is there any other specific questions? Like
I think not financial advice, of course, but anyone who's considering to sell out and tired of crypto not going anywhere, hold tight, because a next wave might be coming. And speaking of Celsius and of course the founder and CEO Alex Mashinsky, who's been pretty spot on with his predictions. I think last year he predicted the price of Bitcoin hitting all-time high or something with 1 day difference, something crazy. He was almost spot on. And he said this year in 2021 that the next all-time high, or we will see, I think he said we will see Bitcoin hit 100K in this market cycle in 2021. Do you agree with that? Do you think there's going to be a higher all-time high? What's your take on the Bitcoin price coming up?
Yeah, for sure. Like I definitely think that like I said, the cycle's far from over. I could see us making an all-time high for sure this year. No one knows for sure, but there are some drivers of the price to the upside that I could see happening. So it really
Hmm.
depends on different factors. But yeah, with Alex Mashinsky's prediction, I mean, he's said publicly for quite a while, like he thinks the end of this year, or he said at some point in this year we'll hit between 140 and 160,000. And
Hmm.
then he sees us finishing the year between 80 and 90,000, so coming back down.
Hmm.
But yeah, for myself, like it really depends if we get a Bitcoin ETF this year. This is something I've been really tracking as far as like headlines. It's one of the few things as far as headlines that I'm actually looking at is what's the well, a lot of people are looking at the fear related headlines. I'm focused on, okay, what are people doing in the background? Like what is the
Hmm.
how are people positioning themselves? And I've seen some headlines recently that are super bullish. Like I mean, we have 13, as far as I'm aware, last time I checked, there was 13 applications in from major
Hmm.
players, right? Fidelity, they had the Gemini twins. Like you
Right.
got some huge. You have
Winklevoss.
Winklevoss. You have Mike
Yeah.
Novogratz has one in. You have
Hmm.
the Grayscale has partnered now with BNY Mellon, who has a good track record of working with ETFs and good connections, of course, being an older bank and one of the largest. So you have these a lot of players position themselves, and you have
Hmm.
13 of these ETFs that are pending applications. So it just seems inevitable that we're going to get an ETF either at the end of this year or early next year. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of this regulation and a lot of these headlines as of late is actually related to this. It's related to, if they do want to get an ETF going, if they do want to launch one, because there's a lot of pressure for them to do so, and there's a lot of pent up demand for an ETF,
Hmm.
they need to I guess in quote unquote clean up the space or make some regulatory moves. So that's I think a big part of the thing we're seeing with like the over leverage on like a
Right.
Binance or these different places that platforms that allow for just really unnecessary amounts of leverage. Like
Yeah.
100x doesn't seem really necessary. Keep it under 20x or keep it whatever under whatever x, like keep it more reasonable. So they're starting to crack down on
Yeah.
things and making sure like, okay, know your customer, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So then on top of that, we're just seeing a lot of headlines with regulations. So I think that's them preparing for an ETF launch. Mike
Hmm.
Novogratz, who's one of the people that has that ETF in, he actually says, I listened to a recent interview with him and he said end of this year, he thinks an ETF will launch. I've
Hmm.
heard on Alex Mashinsky say the same thing on a lot of streams that he thinks it could happen end of this year or early next year. So
Hmm.
to me, that's one of the big drivers for this market cycle. And I don't think the cycle is over until we get an ETF.
Right.
Because they've denied this ETF for so long, and it's got to a point where there's even headlines and people involved in this that have said like it's overdue, like it should have happened a long time ago. So
Right.
they need to clean up some of the manipulation on the weekends in the market and just some different
Hmm.
things before this launches. But it's coming, and we've already seen a launch in Canada. We've already seen it launch in a few other countries. In Canada, there was $1 billion, as far as I remember, there was $1 billion in the first few weeks that came into that ETF.
Wow.
And I listened to another podcast where these guys had been doing ETFs for like 30 years. And they said typically what they see in the financial markets is Canadian ETFs typically are about 50 times smaller than the US. And so, going based on that, we
Hmm.
could see
Wow.
crazy demand. Like we could see upwards of, well, I mean, it seems like a lot to say, but 50 billion
Hmm.
dollars of demand. So
Wow.
ETF's a unique vehicle that a lot of the traditional system is comfortable with.
Yeah.
And so I think it's going to allow a lot more people to get into Bitcoin. And I think it could be one of the most significant drivers of this cycle.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's one thing I'm looking at for sure is when is this ETF going to go? I think it's going to mostly be my prediction, anyways. With that is it's Grayscale that gets it because they partner with BNY and they have the placeholder already kind of ETF they've been doing. So and they're highly incentivized to get that ETF going because there's this discount on BTC and everything that's going
Hmm.
on. They want to probably
Right.
get that to zero. So
Right.
yeah, that's a huge factor. So I don't know, as far as price predictions, like for me, it's more about um, kind of watching and seeing where things go. And as time gets closer, it'll be easier to determine kind of like what levels we'll get to. But yeah, I would say myself, like I would probably say that between 100 and 180 thousand
Wow.
for Bitcoin in this cycle is conservatively, I would say that's going to happen at some point. Like my depending on when the ETF goes, that's going to be a factor. But I would say I also believe myself personally in somewhat in lengthening cycle theory. So I would say that I think the cycle is going to go well into next year. That's kind of how I'm seeing things, and some of the
Mm.
metrics are showing that we could actually see the cycle peak really next year. And a lot of people think it could happen at the end of this year, but I would say that yeah, next year and even into the second half of next year is definitely
Wow.
I would say possible. So
Yeah.
every cycle there's kind of something that surprises us in a way, and this cycle it could be that the cycle is a lot longer than people expect, and it gets kind of drawn out with because it's this cycle is more about the institutional adoption,
Yes.
I would say, and like the last cycle was more to do with the ICO boom. Cycle before was just like complete speculation from retail. So this
Mm.
one is a little bit more of like an actual adoption and institution and big money coming in. It takes them longer to get in the cycle. Like it's a lot harder for them to get in versus a retail person that can just go and buy on exchange. Like institutional
Yeah.
money, we had the Michael Saylor summit at the beginning of this year in February, and there was a
Mm.
lot of significant players that came to that summit, and they need time to get in the market. It can take them three to 12 months to get in, and so I think we'll see more of an influx of that coming in. We also will see headlines. I think we'll see a lot of headlines of major S&P 500 companies that are putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. We saw
Mm.
this recent thing with Amazon, which is another driver. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. But I personally think like we're not even close to the end of the cycle, and with the supply that we have with Bitcoin, like we can see huge moves to the upside. Um, and I don't see a reason why like Alex Bashinsky's prediction is possible. And yeah, like I think we'll see some movements in the cycle, and the price can move quickly, and we'll
Yeah.
see. I think we'll see for sure over 100K, and I
Yeah.
think yeah, next year, well into next year, we could see the cycle peak. That's kind of how I'm looking at it.
And that's I mean, on the face of it, when you hear Bitcoin hitting 100K, it sounds so crazy, but taking all these factors into account that you just outlined, it seems totally possible. You talked about supply shock and institutions coming in with big money. It might take longer times, but when they start to adopt crypto, which they are doing, it can go completely wild. And that's actually, institutions coming in late, relatively speaking, to retail investors. That's actually, in my view at least, one of the beauties of crypto. For the first time, I don't know if it's in history, but for the first time in a very long time, retail investors or everyday people have a chance to get in before VCs, institutional investors, smart money, quote unquote. That's quite unique, I think. I don't think we've seen that many times in history where the average Joe really could set up an account and move faster than institutions and get, into the market, reaping the benefits of being early compared to institutions.